Hi everyone, I'm Heather Robertson. I'm a former editor, now media consultant. And the session today is going to be quite interesting. It's titled Prospects of Sustainability in a Time of Digital Transformation and Political Uncertainty. Our focus is on South Africa. Our first speaker is Professor Harry Dugmore from Rhodes School of Journalism and Media Studies. And he's just working on a report which is hot at the press. You're the first to hear about it, on the sustainability of the news industry and journalism in South Africa in a time of digital transformation and political uncertainty. So over to Harry first.
Thank you. Great, Dr. I hope you all had a good swig of caffeine and are ready to spend what I'm sure is going to be a very entertaining hour or so with us. As Heather said, it's a very South African focus, but I think it's got a lot of resonance for people who are concerned about the sustainability of journalism and the news industry, and trying to understand some of the distinctions between and the nuances between the industry and the act of journalism, the profession of journalism. As Professor Pickard has said very famously, it's journalism that we want to survive. The industry, not so much. Well, of course, the industry does journalism and we'd love it to survive, but as we heard this morning, I think very powerfully, we look at what's happening in the music industry. They've had to, in many ways, reinvent themselves and come up with very different and entirely different logics behind their business models. And I think if we get the opportunity to just talk briefly about that a little bit later, that would be good. So we're launching today, right now, I'm pleased to say, this publication, which all of you have been emailed a link to if you are a registered person at this conference. If you have not registered, this is the first time you are finding out what registration would have brought you. This free downloadable booklet called Paying the Pipe, the Sustainability of the News Industry, etc. It's I'm going to just talk very briefly about some of the highlights of it and some of the things that we look at. And I'm mostly just picking up on points that came up during the various sessions this morning and just after lunch. Because it's a very big report, it's about 70,000 words. It's fairly up to date. We've had a lot of people working on them. Some of them are in this room. Mr. Reg Ramley has been hard at work. He's one of South Africa's foremost experts on media economics and especially microeconomics of South Africa's large firms, the big four newspaper companies, etc. So content-wise, you can just get a brief glance. As I said, all of you who are legitimate paying customers have received this, which I know is everybody in the room. But you can see that we look at some key issues in media economics in Chapter 2. And I make the point, and it's something that, again, I know Heather's going to pick up with the panelists and with me afterwards, that part of the challenge that we have globally and locally in terms of the role conceptions of journalists, how journalists think about themselves, how we think about our profession, is we don't generally think about ourselves as people that need to know necessarily that much about media economics, about the nuts and the bolts. Our job is journalistic excellence. We have a whole sense of what that means in our different countries. And many of you would be familiar with the Worlds of Journalism study that's run out of Germany, that's covered more than 60 countries now, and the notion of role conceptions and how they change. And what's so interesting about those is that there's not a lot of countries where journalists particularly want to get involved in the nuts and bolts. And it may be that journalists often don't have a stake in the very publications, TV stations, radio, websites that they work for. And I think it'll be interesting to see later how some of those experiments in giving journalists a stake, a small piece of the action, is quite transformative in making them interested in, well, you know, how do we make this thing make money? So we're going to look at that, and the report looks at that in quite a lot of depth, using a fair amount of newish theory for those of you that are interested in media economics theory. Some stuff out of QUT, where I'm based this year, Terry Flew, Stuart Cunningham, their newish book, Media Economics, which is a wonderful synthesis of classical neoliberal theory with political economy theory. So if you haven't got Cunningham and Flew's media theory, it really is one of the more enlightening books on this topic. And you'll see as well, we then look a lot at South African audiences and South African models. And I just wanted to dip in quite briefly on some of those issues. Just to start off with some of the things we were talking about this morning from a slightly global point of view. This is something you all know. This is something that every speaker has referenced in one way or another. But it's almost startling to actually see it up there. This is just Facebook's advertising revenues from 2014. And if you've ever seen something that gallops along at an exponential rate, just about doubling every year, that's in billions of US dollars. You know, they were only earning $11 billion in 2014 from global advertising revenue. And you know, next year it's 17, next year it's 22, now it's $33 billion. So as many speakers have mentioned and was said in the very first talk this morning, Francis, in his introduction, 80% of new digital advertising revenues are going to two companies, the duopoly, to Facebook and to Google. And that is quite literally destroying the journalism industry, the news-making industry, in dozens and dozens of countries around the world, including South Africa. So as new revenue is derived, as individual advertisers from the largest to the smallest decide, you know what, I want to go more digital. They're going more digital, 80%, 4/5 of that money is going to Facebook, and that is amazing. If you look at Google's ad revenues from 2001 to 2017, this is all from the report, you can see again, that is a very, very steep curve, 95 billion. So when we wonder where the revenues are going from our newspapers, our TV stations, why even our new, vigorous, exciting websites and social media driven operations like the Daily Maverick, who we'll hear from slightly later, why even that dynamism and those organizations, some of the leading lights in that world, Quartz and BuzzFeed and Politico, the money is heading towards Google. Google and Facebook, as you know, and we can talk about later, have the most enormously interesting and effective tax structuring and capital restructuring, them and Apple, who are able to pretty much avoid paying taxes anyway, including in their home countries. So not only does the revenue get, in a sense, sucked out of the media industry, of the news-making industry, of the journalism profession, it also doesn't come back to societies, including, ironically, in the USA, in the form of what would normally happen in taxes. Standard Oil was a terrible monopoly. Many of the old monopolies that we had in South Africa, the Anglo monopolies of the 70s and 80s, these were bad monopolies. They took large chunks of business and extracted monopoly rent. They paid taxes. And here we have these new, powerful monopolies who are able to avoid a lot of that. Not that Google don't do a lot of good in the world, same with Facebook. A lot of the Google tools for journalists are mind-blowing, and they really are trying, but we've got to get on top of this extraction. And just again, what is that doing? We all know that nobody would be particularly surprised. Every country has got a similar downward sloping curve, but it's sometimes just interesting to see how our newspapers, for those of you that are not from South Africa, some of those are our biggest titles, just to see how they've lost anything between 50 and 75% of their readers in the last 15 years. So these are very, very steep declines. It's of course uneven, but yeah, basically those figures are relatively accurate and they do move up and down. I also wanted to just say something a little bit, particularly for those of you that are not entirely familiar with the South African political context. It's very important, and this book tries to establish, and it's the same in so many other countries in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, in South America. There's so many developing countries that battle from a media point of view because of very high degrees of inequality and poverty. And it's a little bit different doing journalism and running a news industry when one has those kind of levels of inequality. We really are a little bit of an outlier in South Africa. We're fairly unrivaled. Namibia and Botswana come close. But we have been number one for about the last 10 years, and for most of the last 30 years as the most unequal country in the world, as measured by wealth with the Gini coefficient, but also by measures of income, the Gini coefficient, but also by measures of tangible wealth. The most recent study of this last year, 50% of South Africans have, there's a very alarming phrase, no measurable wealth at all. So it's just too small to even go, that's on the wealth side. Income side is better, but it's still fairly appalling. And we can also see, and for those of you that are from Europe and have been through the recession, been through what Portugal and Italy and Spain went through with their massive, massive rates of youth unemployment, really gave South Africa a run for money. I mean, Greece in particular almost knocked us off our pedestal as having the highest youth unemployment in the world. But they weren't able to do so. We are still number one in terms of that particular statistic. And in that context, we also have, as you can see, the political machinations of our last decade, which I'm going to be speaking about in just a minute or two, where the most extraordinary thing has happened that I think kind of has taken place, the only kind of analogy that I've kind of come close to is some of the stuff that's been happening in Turkey the last 4 or 5 years, and Berlusconi in Italy, where you have a criminal family starting a 24-hour news bulletin, a 24-hour news service, specifically and explicitly to distract from the looting that they're doing, to distort the news, to try and influence the debate. I mean, the Italian mafia must look at this, and the Sicilian mafia, and the crime families in the Middle East, and say, wow, what a fantastic idea. A 24-hour news channel devoted entirely to attacking the people who attack us, the police, the investigators, the hawks, anybody else, anybody who's not in our little faction of looting. We can 24 hours, and we can use that TV station as a way of legitimately all of these fake tanks. You heard of fake tanks, think tanks that are not real, they're just made up and funded by you secretly, and you can get your own people from those fake tanks onto your TV talk shows, and you can have a very good discussion about how leading journalists like Ferial Haffajee are actually having affairs with Johan Rupert, the leader of the white monopoly capital. You can put that out with a straight face. It's absolute Trumpian falsities. So we had that in South Africa, and we'll talk about that. It's the most extraordinary thing between the New Age and ANN7, owned by the Gupta family and the Zuma family, literally the family of the president and the Guptas, coming in and trying to divert state funding, very successfully in some cases, from NGOs, from government departments, from ministries. And at the same time, why is this slide up? At the same time, Jerry Jacob Zuma's presidency, our unemployment rate goes from terrible to just, can you believe it? 1.5 million people in 2018. Almost 1 in 2. South Africans who are able-bodied and want to work are unable to work, as we stand here today, by the expanded definition of unemployment. And poverty and employment is still deeply racialized in South Africa. It's not an exclusively black problem or an exclusively white problem, but 30% of unemployed South Africans are black South Africans. Colored South Africans also have an enormously high rate of unemployment. So those very high rates of those 9 million, that's roughly the breakup of that. And in that kind of context, I just wanted to share with you, because it came up in one of the small group sessions, just how important it is for us as Africans in the African continent, in all our countries, but particularly in South Africa, to really focus on mobile prices. It's extraordinary, the digital divide and how persistent it is, because we have these two companies, Vodacom and MTN, who pretty much between them have 80–90% of the market share. Celsius brought that down, but I mean, they're still at 75%. And if we go back, you'll see that on average, our prices are substantially higher than the rest of our neighboring countries, and unbelievably higher compared to what people are paying in the developed world. So the global north has that advantage, and our people are kept out of Wikipedia and be able to look up things on Google simply because we have these extraordinarily high data rates. Telephony and voice have fallen like you can't believe in the last 5 years to nothing. But data is still incredibly, incredibly expensive if you buy it by the pay-as-you-go. So those are some of the contradictions. Just very briefly for, again, just to contextualize one of the discussions today, to see that still South Africa is very much a radio nation. Many of our neighboring countries, obviously in the context of poverty and unemployment, radio is the go-to media. There's no solution about getting more news to South Africans, and South Africans need more news. There's no solution to getting more news that isn't also a radio solution. So we need radio solutions, we need TV solutions. You can see how popular TV is. Newspapers, it's only about a quarter of South Africans, in terms of seeing a newspaper, it's about 20% of South Africans. In terms of buying a newspaper, in any given month, it's about 10% of South Africans. It's a very minority pursuit. Newspaper buying is not a big deal, and it's becoming less and less of a big deal. So Bart, just to conclude very briefly, 3 or 4 more minutes, about the extraordinary happenings of the last decade. It's partly been enabled by President Zuma's appointment of a variety of people, some good and some less good, but to have, as your ministers of communication, people that are around for a very brief time and have a very clear brief. This is about controlling the narrative. This is about making sure, not that the ANC puts its best foot forward, but that a faction within a faction of the ANC puts its best foot forward. So the ruling party, a faction in the ruling party, a captured and corrupt faction within the ruling party, is able, through these ministers, to take complete control of the SABC. Now you saw in the previous slide how some people depend on radio. Those radio stations, Ukozi and Uklabo Wenene, have 7-8 million people that listen to them for 4 hours or more a day. That's what the new Broadcasting Research Council research calls long and heavy listening. Long and heavy. Those are very powerful stations. And if you want to control the narrative, you get hold of the SABC. And that is why they threw the most extraordinary resources, they being that faction, what we call in our report the Zuma-Gupta axis, after the Pari report, the Zuma-Gupta elite. And they captured the SABC. They threw out hundreds of good people, as they did in SARS and all the other organizations they captured, from SAA through to ESCOM, right the way through. And they put in their own people. And their own people to put this particular narrative together, particularly ministers 3, 5, and 6, but particularly Minister number 5, Faith, who's an expert in a Gubalesque sense at mass media propaganda. And as a result, we now have a new minister that everybody was hoping we would have someone who could stick around, be good, be on the right side of history, be progressive, and most of you would know which side of what fences Nomvula Makinyane has sat the last 10 years. And you will know that for all of us that are in communication, there was just such a sense of dismay and disheartenment to have someone who was so part of that faction, at the heart of that faction, as the Minister of Water, Affairs and Sanitation beforehand, but much more so as the head of the ANC elections, as the person that's driven so much of this, and is now the Minister of Communication. I don't think it's going to last long. I think we're going to get our 10th minister in 8 years, and then probably our 11th. But the fact of the matter is that there's an election coming up next year. And I think that the ruling party is very worried that the SABC is now once again, like it was meant to always do, it's now become a public broadcaster again. If you haven't seen the SABC news in the last couple of months, it's just chalk and cheese. It's good, it's independent, it's feisty, it's journalism. And it's really something we need to support. And there may be people in the ruling party that think, before this election, maybe we don't need so much truth telling. So that's the situation that we find ourselves now. Just very briefly, the New Age and ANC have been sold by the Zuma-Gupta alliance. They have a new owner who didn't pay 450 million, as was announced 2 months ago. A new price, unsaid, has been negotiated. And all links have been severed severely severed by the new owners. And the valuable resources, because ANC built up an incredible reputation. It even got up to about 8 or 9% of people watching it. So did the New Age. But that reputation, that goodwill, you know how hard it is to build a name. That has been entirely undone by the fact that it just got renamed on the 1st of May. And we now will have the Afro Voice instead of the New Age, and we will have Afro Worldview instead of ANN7. And it's extraordinary that in the announcement on the 1st of May that the new proprietor made, he said, well, the big break is not just changing the name. We're actually now going to do journalism, which is something we would hope to see. We do need, and I'll conclude with this, diversity in South Africa. We desperately need to undo generational patterns of ownership that has been corporatist, largely white, managements which have been largely white,
at top levels, even if the editor core and the journalistic core has undone. The idea of an ANN7 is a brilliant one. The idea of a new age is absolutely to be welcomed. And everybody did at the time, said, we need more media diversity, we need more density. But hang on a second, a company owned by the president's son, and this Gupta family, who are there again, because we didn't really know in 2009, 2010, that's what we don't need. We need diversity, we need black companies, we need startups, but we don't need people that in the short space of time, from 2009 to now, have estimated to have looted more than 100 billion rand. It looted and externalized. The money's gone offshore. That's a lot of money that is alleged to have been taken by the Gupta family. And having these propaganda organs running interference, and as the report says, distracting, delegitimizing the opposition, distorting the news, it's the most extraordinary confluence. And hopefully we have now seen the end of that. Finally, the report, and you're all welcome to read it, makes a whole variety of recommendations, and I'd welcome the opportunity, Heather, if we want to talk about something, but we're really talking about how do we keep the SABC independent? How do we get the Media Diversity and Development Agency, this wonderful agency that we have, which is much admired across Africa and in many other countries around the world, Media Diversity and Development Agency, but funded with 70 million a year. When it was designed 20 years ago, it was meant to get a billion rand. It needs about 2 billion a year just to do the basic things that it says in its charter and its mandate. So there are a variety of suggestions there. Also about using funds recovered from state capital. We're about to get KPMG is about to pay back a billion rand. That money should be coming back, of course, to Eskom, of course to Transnet, of course to all the other companies that have been looted, SAA, etc., the SOEs. But some of it should come back to journalism. Because journalists actually have been a large part, journalists, the judiciary, of exposing this collusion and this elite. And then there's also some ideas there about taxing Google and Facebook, which I think European countries are leading the way at the moment. If Google and Facebook are going to take all our revenues away and not pay tax in our countries or in even their home countries, we just take the heavy line like Germany's done, and that's it. We are going to put these things in place. We take a heavy line that France has done with Uber, and we say we are going to do it in this way. You're not going to destroy an industry, especially an industry so important for democracy, and do that on our watch. So we're going to carve back some of those revenues from a Google and Facebook tax. It can be 1% of turnover, whatever. We're going to give it directly back to the Media Diversity Development Agency and a wide variety of other bodies. The Sunday Times should get some of that. Even the new ANN7 and the new age, if they're going to be genuinely part of the diversity of South Africa, should get some of those funds. So read the report. There's still a lot of work to do on the referencing. There's a couple of issues with Chapter 6. The hyperlinks haven't come through. So if you want to click the hyperlinks on Chapter 6, you won't be able to. So it'll look, they're underlined, so you can see, it's supposed to be a reference. There's a few other little issues that we picked up, but we just got it off the press yesterday and we emailed it to all of you. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Henry. We're now going to speak to people at the coalface. With all due respect, Henry is an academic. We have two people who have been involved in the media. Next to me, the first person that we're going to speak to is Khadija Patel. She's the editor-in-chief of the Mail and Guardian, a newspaper that has a long history in South Africa. It was formed by journalists from their pension funds when the newspaper, the Land Daily Mail, was closed, and recently has been through some financial difficulties, but at the end of last year, Khadija and the team have fantastic news. They've now got funding from the NDIF. So I'd like to ask Khadija to speak to us about what that actually means for the sustainability of journalism in the Mail and Guardian institution that all of us have loved in South Africa.
Thank you, Heather. So I got to the Mail and Guardian about 18 months ago, and I was staying steady for a former boss of mine, by the way, that I was, I think, the 4th editor in 5 years at the MNG, which gives you an idea of the turmoil that the organization was in. The MNG is for those of you who don't know, and many of you, of course, are from outside of South Africa, The MNG is an independent news publisher. Our print product is printed weekly, but the MNG also has a long digital footprint. We, can be traced back to having the first sort of digital news publication in the continent. So there's a rich history with the MNG, but the last few years have certainly not been kind to us. Some part of that certainly has been our own fault. Our resident evil capitalists, as I call them, to their faces, by the way, have been guilty of making some really bad decisions that got us into this trouble. But there's also the global headwinds, changes in the consumption patterns of news. There's also been changes in the economy, and as a small independent publisher, we feel all of these changes a lot more acutely than some of my colleagues who are sitting in publications that are buffered within a listed company, for example. So it can be very, very scary for a newsroom. I mean, we're talking about, the practice of journalism, which is a difficult job at the best of times, but add layers and layers of uncertainty, not to mention the continual onslaught on the credibility of journalists, and you understand how difficult it is actually to continue doing journalism. And I think that's something that, that we have to highlight, that beyond all else, it's becoming more and more difficult to actually produce the news. So I got to the MNG, it's over 18 months now. I stopped counting after a few months. And like I pointed out, it was a time of great turmoil, great flux. The organization had gotten used to operating in a sense of crisis constantly, and that wasn't exactly healthy. Not for the newsroom, not for the great organization, certainly not for journalism in South Africa. Because I think that the MNG is important not just for journalism, not just for the media space in South Africa, but I think the MNG and the continued existence of the MNG is important for South Africa generally. And that the history of this institution is so rich and is so important. The work that was done by what was then the Weekly Mail in the 80s really brought us to this moment. And it showed us the importance and the power of media. And that's something I believe that we have to guard. So when I got to the MNG, there was this was kind of the context within which I entered. My own background, I never worked in a big mainstream print news organization before I got to the MNG. I started my own digital news publication called The Daily Box in 2014, which was really successful and taught me many lessons about what it's like to actually ensure the sustainability of a news publication within a digital space. And before that, I was with the Daily Maverick for several years. And Steli will speak to you about the history of the Daily Maverick more comprehensively. But again, this was also a digital startup. Before that, I ran my own community print magazine that was distributed regionally. So I have this experience of straddling editorial, but also working within distribution and publishing. When both with my magazine and with the Daily Box, I was everything from the managing editor to the salesperson to the distribution agent, etc. So when I got to the MNG, and I remember at one stage our CEO, Hussein Kajika, said to me one day, please don't feel daunted by everything that's going on. He acknowledged that it may seem like it's a lot, but just don't feel overwhelmed. And I thought, this was early on, and I thought, what are you talking about? This is easy compared to what I used to do, right? I mean, suddenly there's all these people who are doing everything, right? And so there's a managing editor, there's a deputy editor, there's a news editor. Wow, there's even cars. Guys, this is next level. So it's, so that was sort of like the culture shock coming into the MNG. But what was clear to me, and if you read, the history of this organization and sort of my own experience, I knew that what the MNG needed to do as well is that we needed to return to really our startup roots. And in order for news publications to exist, I think that we have to learn to be more frugal. We have to learn to be very agile. And we have to be light. We have to be able to try new things. We have to learn to be able to give it up when they're not working and not hang on to it and hope that it works someday. And that really is the history of this organization. And that's what I started there trying to do. But of course, there's no immediate switch that makes everything right. And it was, there were times that were extremely difficult for me, as the head of a newsroom, especially when journalists are quite disempowered, really, when you know that there are things going on that really may infringe on their ability to do their work next week, right? So this is why when the MDIF stepped up late last year and became the majority shareholders of the MNG, I could feel a sense of relief settling over the newsroom, which I wish sometimes I can describe to you properly, but that I could actually feel the newsroom being lighter. And this is because we understand, and a lot of people believe that, oh, so you've got the MDIF, New York-based nonprofit, you guys can just go ahead and just, do everything you want now, and it actually doesn't work like that. They're not our blessings. Have to explain to non-South Africans what blessings are, and so they're not our sugar daddies or benefactors, rich benefactors, right? They've come in with the intention of ensuring that the MNG becomes financially viable in itself, that we use what we have and we improve on what we're doing in order for MNG within itself to find the sustainability that it's searching for. And they're confident, and they've certainly imbued that confidence to everybody else working there, that it's possible, and we're seeing the results already. So that's what, so that's the current situation at the MNG. There's no, of course, there's no immediate button to press where everything is suddenly all right. But I think that what this difficulty has taught us, and certainly what I believe that has alerted us as a newsroom to, is that we cannot be aloof of what goes on the other side of the wall. That we have a vested interest in it, and certainly at the MNG, staff have a 10% stake. So beyond just beyond the fact that we want to ensure the integrity of our journalism, etc. There's also this is ours as well. There's a sense of belonging that we need to protect. So that's really what we are setting together to do, to ensure that the MNG is here for another 5 years, another 10 years, because I believe that the MNG is best placed to survive, actually. If we look at Harry's report, for example, the MNG has suffered the least sort of onslaught on print circulation. I think we've dropped very little compared to everybody else. So I believe that there will always be a place for a print MNG, though it might be much smaller. But I also believe that we have the space now to start thinking again about how we are going to make our digital properties work for us, how we are going to navigate the duopoly on our own terms. So that's really where we are.
Thank you so much, Khadija. Okay, the next speaker is Stili Galalombos. Stili is the CEO and publisher of the Daily Maverick, and just that she worked for quite a number of years. It's quite an innovative digital-only media property, very innovative, and Stili has amazing different ways of generating revenue and keeping the Daily Maverick going. It's going for 10 years, right? Almost 10 years. So, he's really managed to keep it going. So, Stili will explain to us how he did this.
Thank you, Heather. Yeah, I'm not sure we have enough time or enough sedatives to tell you how we did this, but it was I'll give a bit of background. I don't really have a history in media before this. This was my first gig in media. My editor-in-chief, Branko Brikic, was the founder and the brains behind Maverick magazine, which was a precursor to this. And when that stopped publishing in 2008, he looked to move it online. So the digital world was coming, the digital economy, the digital publishing way of things was coming. And he managed to raise some seed funding from a friend of mine, which was how that fateful coffee happened. And in between trying to decide to take accent and the opportunity before me sounded less terrible than other things that I could get involved in. And from there, Daily Maverick was born, and it was a team of like 4 or 5 people in a room with an incredibly loud air conditioner. Somewhere in Hyde Park, and just kind of grew from there. We had a focus group, a beta testing group of about 200 people that we started with, and then just kind of grew from there, and just focused on doing what we thought many people were overlooking in the digital space. At that time, most of the big newspapers were keeping all their good content for the print product, so there was very little good feature-length original content online, and that's where we wanted to play, and that's where we focused all our resources on. And from day one, we invested in a quality newsletter product as well, which has helped us grow and in our own way helped us sort of stave off the reliance on social media and the platforms for traffic and engaged audiences. And so we've done that from day one, and we've had a very, I think even Khadija had a couple of stints at that. Those are tough times for any of our newsletter editors who wake up quite early to get that product out to our audience. And it's grown with us and has become a significant source of both traffic and revenue for us. But the core focus has always been to focus on quality original content, to let that content be what helps us stand out from the competition. And people use the word innovative. I don't really think we are that innovative. I think if focusing on quality content is innovative, then maybe yes. But we've just kind of realized our limitations with regards to budgets and the number of people that work for us, and we leverage the goodwill that we have with a lot of people and contributors. And also, we talk about having journalists have skin in the game so that they feel connected and a passion for the organization. And they don't need to have financial interest to have skin in the game or to have that connection. You can do that by creating the right environment to start with, and treating people properly, and with, in some cases compassion, and just having a personal touch in your relations with your newsroom and the people that work with you. And that's something that we focus on, with building this sort of family-like environment where people were going the extra mile for each other, and people were willing to do those difficult tasks and do it with passion, and do it because they wanted to, and not because they were simply getting a paycheck at the end of the month. So that was kind of how we built this thing, was focusing on the assets and the skills and the strengths that we had. Our disadvantage of not having a traditional legacy publication or TV news channel or radio channel to rely on meant that we didn't have to worry about protecting that. So we could put all our best stuff online and push that. My relative inexperience in the media space was both a disadvantage and an advantage because we started everything from scratch. We could come at it from a common sense point of view, what worked, what didn't work, not what worked in the past, and let's try and hang on to that. So, we, and Frank and I have this, very dynamic relationship. We see eye to eye on almost everything, and, I can understand him in the, even with his steady accent, which is a bonus. And yeah, that's how we sort of built it. And then we fought. It was I can't tell you how hard it was to keep this thing going and to still keep it going. So it's a massive challenge. You've got to cut corners. You've got to do more than your fair share. You're doing up to 5 different jobs that people would normally do in the corporate environment. I think we, referred to it earlier, walking into the NG and like, wow, what are all these luxuries? And and that's just so we were born into wartime. We've only ever known wartime. So all this that is going on has been our status quo for a long time. I think for us, we're accustomed to it, and survival is something that we're good at, and hanging on is one of our expertise. And I think we've got a very low cost base, and that's what we focused on. Was from day one, we didn't have print budgets or radio budgets to tap into and subsidize our digital operations, and so that meant everything we did had to be done in the most cost efficient and effective way, while still trying to produce the best quality product. And I think we proved that it can be done, but it just takes a hell of a lot of effort and 2 crazy bearded guys to kind of lead the charge on that. Yeah, so that's been our experience. And then, experimenting with things. We saw everything that we've done, we've always tried to do in a meaningful way. We didn't want to do it just for the sake of growing revenue or because there was a gap in the market. It had to satisfy the meaningful tests for us. And it needed to be something that people walked away from, either having read it or having experienced it as a conference or an event, and gotten real value out of it, and not just wait for the networking opportunities, coffee time, or whatever it is. And so building the events side of the business was fun and challenging and exciting, and again starting with a carte blanche of like just what do you want it to be, and that evolved. That evolved as the economic pressures have set in, as the opportunities have arisen, as the politics of the country have pulled us into a certain focus area of content. I think before, in our earlier days, we probably had a wider array of articles, and we've obviously been very focused on the politics in the last 6 or 7 years, I'd say. And all those factors just kind of keep pulling you, and you just react and change and tweak, and just keep fighting is really what we've been doing for the last 9 years.
You've also had quite a sizable investment. We haven't disclosed who those investors are publicly. How long will that last for? And do you strive to reach profitability and to be totally self-sustaining without?
Yeah, so we say we're not for profit with a profit ambition. And no, it's look, that runway is always too close for comfort. And so, we're always actively looking for, those fundraising rounds were all about intermediate rounds of funding to sort of set us up for the big opportunity to either really invest in putting us on a bigger playing field, or a level playing field with some of our bigger competitors, or potentially looking at kind of almost like a reverse takeover of a big opportunity. So, we're always constantly in a state of fundraising in some way, whether that's grant funding, investment, sponsorship. It's all kind of like the same plot with different twists.
Thanks. Are there any questions from the floor? Just raise your hands and then we'll give. Okay. any of the speakers.
No, thanks. No. I think you're making an important point on the sustainability of the industry. But for me, more than any other thing, it's a comment that I want to raise, because in my view, the issue of sustainability comes a long way in the history of South Africa. Because the manner in which you present it as if it's something, it's an incident, it's something that has just happened. But it's a historical fact. And we know for the fact that if you look at some of the publications in the late 1880s, you had, for example, Ivo Zabantu Oranzund, loosely translated, it's Black Opinion. That publication served a particular sector of community, which is the majority in South Africa, and it couldn't be sustained. But the question is, why these publications then, as compared to the Star that was published in Grahamstown? And I don't know, but it worked very closely with one of the conglomerates then, which is predominantly white, conglomerate, that funded it until late, subject to corruption, 70s, 80s, and then it later became an edition of one conglomerate again, but it was sustained. But if you look at these other publications, like there's a number of them, but the one that I can recall that was predominantly black-owned, it was the Black Opinion. It managed to survive because at some point it was bought by Caxton, which is another conglomerate, media conglomerate in South Africa. It managed to survive. I think it survived, I was trying to check, from 1882 to something like 1998, but it manifested itself in terms of names and so forth. But obviously, once it was bought, it had to go through music metamorphosis. It changed the shape and the touch altogether. Now, as we make a presentation of sustainability, particularly in the context of South Africa, you should be able to look at what transpired historically, and without necessarily just jumping the gun and say the new age, the what. Obviously, for me, the new age, as I don't know if the prof puts it, it's the right thing. It was a good idea, but it turned out to be something else. That's the truth. But you cannot isolate cases within the media industry, particularly Africa. I don't want to say South Africa only. I like the presentation by the prof from Makerere. He tried to break down the complicities around your community radio and so on, of which I think it's one area that we have neglected, because I had an opportunity at one stage in my life, I'm not that young. We went to check, we did a study, I think, with the Socialist Party in Stockholm, where they were funding the, I'll call it startups, and those media, small media houses survived a bit, but it was not a sustainable model. But the situation in Africa is such that you will never be able to survive as a small, whether the Mail Guardian editor, you tried something that couldn't work out. But for as long as you are not part of the conglomerate, forget. And unfortunately, the presenter there focuses more on the big boys. And if you are talking plurality, you also have to look at the up-and-coming boys, so that there is that divergence that we want to see happening within the space of the media itself. So for me, the focus is more on the big boys than the the up and coming voice, and that only has a problem, particularly if you are to talk narrative, because the context, the main issue generate news talks to issues of sustainability, and this is the complexity of the situation in South Africa. And as I look at the house here, I think the focus for me, the Shabir brother of mine, it's I don't think in South African context it addresses, the discussion addresses the problems that we have, because I appreciate social media and whatever for one reason, because it's a disruptor. But it's not a disruptor from the economic point of view. And that is where I only agree with it. But if really we are to look at sustainability, particularly in South African context, it's one of the complex things, and I don't know how it will be dealt with, but it's an issue that is always at the back of my mind. And I don't think the views that are expressed here are really coming any close to addressing the problem that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Harry, would you like to respond to that?
No, I'm fine. I think I just say, if I may, it is a very long report, and I think many of the concerns that you've raised, in terms of context, location, the proper media mix that any country needs between small startups, between ethnic publications, between multiple languages, are all entirely true. So it's a lot of that stuff is in the report. I think that you will see that it's much more located in the history of the struggles in South Africa. South Africa's news media has been dominated by the Big Four. It is a legacy of both colonialism and apartheid. It's a deeply racialized and racist media industry until 20 years ago. And we still are figuring out how we...
Thank you very much, Professor Henry, for the very useful presentation. I have a big observation about your statistics on unemployment. Looking at the statistics of BRICS countries and South Africa, I was so surprised that recently last year looking at the figures in India, China, Brazil, Russia, the unemployment rates are probably less than 6%. And whereas South Africa, as you indicated, it's more than 27% of patient numbers, not be showing more than that. Now, when we look at the population size, I mean, South African population is too compared with our counterparts in BRICS and China, and like 25 times more than that of the population of South Africa. India, more than 20 times. Now, it's a paradoxical situation that we're sitting with this bigger problem here, and which is really threatening every one of us here. So I just would like to hear from you, I mean, what would be the effective strategy that we can try to adopt to mitigate this problem? So I know there are so many economic reforms that have been adopted and so many programs have been implemented, but you see it's like a water wine in your bottle and nothing has been done much. So I just would like to hear your perspective. What is the effective mechanism that we can adopt?
I just a very quick response to that. I alluded to it, and I think the report's funded by the Open Society Foundation of South Africa that funds a lot of initiatives to get journalism off the ground, provide information that people need to be participating in country and citizen. I think with the BRICS, and with India and China, as you mentioned, and in fact many countries around the world, a key is the cost of on-ramping into a news environment. It's just way, way too high in many African countries and in South Africa. You have to be pretty well off just to get the news, unless you're going to get it on radio. And even there, you've got to be able to afford to buy a radio set or listen to it on your phone, etc. So a lot of the work that has been done by colleagues in other institutions and the right to know in South Africa is about the actual accessibility cost. We have way, way, way too expensive cell phone contracts and data, etc. So what we need to see in South Africa is a rollout of free Wi-Fi. All the campuses, all the TVET colleges, every school, all public libraries, municipalities, people need to be able to get online and then they can choose, they can go to find sources that work for them. So I do believe that many of the BRICS countries, the cost of connectivity is lower than it is in South Africa, India, for example. And we need to learn from that, because if you give people that on-ramp, they can leapfrog. Of course, it would be nice if newspapers weren't so expensive, if magazines weren't so expensive. But really, I think the future is very much digital. It's a different question to how you sustain those businesses, but you're talking about audiences and access. And too many South Africans are just priced out of the market and cannot get the news that they want and they deserve, and cannot get the density and diversity of news.
Thank you. My name is Manta Khadeli. I work for the Office of the Auditor General. My question is for the teacher. The weekly mail, or is a million guardians with a very proud history. It is my view that it should not be allowed to die. It played a very important role. It was very biased to the oppressed community. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's Rafi, who has got a very interesting story about one of their very innovative work they did by AIDS. So I've got so much to learn from this publication. But my question is, will I be correct if I make an assumption that part of the troubles of the Middle Guardian, particularly post-1994, as donor funding started to dry up, is that it began to move away from its core base, which is the majority of the South African population, and started, of course, not of its own making, trying to move towards a particular audience that would assist it to sustain itself. Therefore, it began to isolate the core base that is very loyal to the paper and its history. I just wanted to check if I make the assumption that I'm correct. Thanks.
So I tend to agree with you in some ways, but I think there's shades of complexity as well in that. So what happened in the early 90s was actually the Guardian newspaper in the UK came on board. And they really were like the blessings for back then. Right? They were just, it was raining money. And that's how the Weekly Mail became, at first the Weekly Mail and Guardian, and then the Mail and Guardian. So the model definitely changed in that there certainly was, the financial precarity that had characterized the early days or the early years of the institution was not there anymore. So, because the Guardian was footing the bills. But, I love reading about what happened back then and trying to understand decisions that were taken. So I came across something, it was actually something that we published recently when one of the stalwarts of the Weekly Mail passed away recently. And he was an investigative journalist. And he exposed the third force, etc. He basically exposed the extent to which the apartheid regime was working against the people of this country, and the extent to which they were not being honest as well, at that time, in even what they were saying. It was Anton Haber who wrote this. Of course, he was editor at the time, and he points out that in 1994, they suddenly had to reconfigure their news lens and try to understand what are they going to report on now, because there isn't a struggle to report on anymore. So they've got to find a new focus. So, for example, this particular journalist whom the obituary was about went into doing environmental journalism and actually transferring that, the skills he developed as an investigative journalist and taking that to that beat. But I think that, and it's something that I've been prodded. I was responded at Professor Bassaman, I'm not sure he was here earlier, at his fantastic book, which everyone should read, which traces, really the role of media in the global south and how geopolitics also affects our own configurations, but our understanding of ourselves and how that is also influencing the nature of journalism in itself. And the one thing that I think Herman's book does well for me as a working journalist, because there's many papers that I push, I still like to hope that I can call myself a journalist, that we have to figure out and we have to remember that our core function is not to sell newspapers and it's not to accrue revenue, but it is to tell the story of what is happening in this country at this time, as honestly and as accurately as possible. And once we get mixed up with, with other things, because while it is important for us to keep in mind the sustainability, we cannot make that the core objective of what we're doing. So there was an interesting conversation in my newsroom last week where we basically got our hands on an interesting, potentially explosive set of documents from the African Union that we started reporting on last week and we'll go on reporting over the next few weeks, which basically point to the level of dysfunction within the organization and basically explains why the African Union is so rudderless when it comes to responding to conflicts like Burundi, right? So early on in the week, last Monday, there's a conversation happening among section editors, and as we start off every week, think, this is what we have, this is what's been planned. And the strongest story that we began the week with was, of course, this explosive set of documents that we know, has caused a freak out. A message I received right now told me that, the inner workings of the African Union, everybody's up in arms, everybody's trying to find out who the whistleblower was. These are explosive documents, and yet one editor says, we can never lead the paper with the AU. Nobody is going to buy that paper. South Africans don't care, right? So on the one hand, that's very, very true, because South Africans tend to be very, very insular, right? And unless you can make that relate to them in some way, you're going to struggle to get their interest. But on the other hand, somebody else pointed out, but that's not what we're here to do. We're here to actually tell the story. So I'm answering your question in a roundabout way, but what I'm trying to say is that the focus of what we ought to be doing sometimes does get mixed up, and it sometimes does get clouded. And I'm loath to criticize my predecessors and decisions that were taken before me, but I think that for me, what is really important, and it's really ironic for the editor of a paper that costs 40 Rand to say that we ought to be communicating with greater South Africa and understanding what the public sphere is, and if media is to actually enjoying the freedom within which the society that we want, if we really are going to exist within that free society, then we also have to be reaching more than just the elites. And that, I think, is crucial as well, that if we have to conceptualize a media that is not just speaking to people who can afford to buy the Mail Guardian, but greater South Africa. And I think that is a challenge not just for the MNG, but I think for media generally. And it's about us trying to understand then how do we actually sustain this idea, because it's not just then sustaining the Mail Guardian, but really it's sustaining the idea of a media, of a news media that actually exists within that idea of the public space, of the public sphere. That ideal, how do we ensure that happens, and how do we ensure that we establish media institutions that are rigorous independent and free within this space. That I think is really important.
This is directed to Professor Damo. It's more of really of a comment. I don't know to what extent does your paper address the issue of vernacular content. And the reason I'm asking this is because, you know, we do analysis in media, and the focus tend to be in those platforms or those institutions that really serve a certain elite audience. The example that I would give you is that prime time in South Africa, as we know, English prime time news, as you know, has changed. If you look at what the numbers were 3 years ago, you could easily get 4 million people watching a prime time bulletin. Now, if you get 1.2, you have done well. This is happening in all platforms. But at the same time, if you look at vernacular, for example, if you look at the Zulu language, the Zulu language is going up and is sitting at about over 4 million viewers. And then you have a situation where the public broadcaster then coming into play and spending their resources on an English language 24-hour news channel. And if you look at the kind of resources they are involved in doing that, and the kind of audiences, the number of audiences that is for, you begin to ask the question, are we as South Africa so positioned in the fact that all that is English is sellable, that even in our institution we judge half the time academics and everybody judge the public broadcaster by their English offering, and there's no one who's looking at their vernacular offering that is being actually beamed up to mass audience, and there are no attempts from the current owners of the narrative, being people who do academic research, being people who own the media, to say we have over 50 million South Africans, even though in terms of class and inequality, the best AR come from a very limited amount of people who can afford to pay tax, maybe 300 of those people. But we have 47 million of people that are left out in what is news in that information era. And what are we doing in order to address those that situation where really news is a conversation amongst 3 million South Africans? The rest of the public is cut out of that conversation.
I think it's a very powerful point, and I think both within media scholarship and journalism scholarship in South Africa, the point is very often made that the scholarship is in English and it's often about news that is done in English. And for some of you that have been, in a sense, for all of us who've been paying attention for the last decade or 2 decades, we've seen a very interesting trend take place in South Africa. The new South African Reconciliation Barometer says that 90% of South Africans, when asked what their identity is, 90% of South Africans currently, and it's up every 5 years for the last 25 years, are choosing to answer that question with an ethnic identity, a language identity. Only 11% of South Africans are saying my identity is South African first, and then I'm a Zulu, or I'm an Afrikaner, or I'm Greek, or I'm Sesotho, whatever. So that has been increasing and increasing, and part of what the media does in most national ecologies is forge a sense of nationhood. So partly what we have to say, because of the differences in philosophy of language, because of the stalled national project, is why are people, in a sense, retreating into ethnic and language enclaves? It's got a lot of positivity to it, and it's very important psychologically and powerful in terms of people inheriting and rediscovering their culture. And all of those things are very important, and it's a global phenomenon. But at the same time, something is happening. When every 5 years, when the survey is run, fewer and fewer people are saying, I'm South African and I'm also X, Y, and Z. People are putting the South African second. So I think that's very interesting. But there's just a very quick thing on the news. There's absolutely no doubt that the reason why the fight for the SABC is such high stakes is because of the vernacular language radio stations and TV stations. They're unbelievably powerful. Whoever controls theirs really can shape the narrative. And they're just going to continue to grow. So our problem in South Africa is that some of the diversity that we're looking for in the print space, in the radio space, is in vernacular. That's where the money's not going. So much more money. Everybody should be able to listen to the news in the language of their choosing. And we're not giving that to South Africans. You should be able to choose your language. If you want to listen to English, fine, but if you want to listen in your own language, even the small languages, you should have that option.
I have noted with a great deal of interest the points that have been made. And Khadija, as you were speaking about the history of the Mail and Guardian, I can relate to a lot of the concerns you have expressed, because I am from the weekly Mail. And you will realize that most of us who were in the very early days of that publication will always make that distinction, that weekly Mail. And Mail and Guardian is like it exists in another world. And I'm not saying that because it's me. In fact, last week I was with David Dyson, who was our media lawyer at the time. And we were talking about this whole development. And I remember unconsciously he then said, hey, we were the weekly Mail. So I think at some point, we need to name the elephant, the white elephant in the room. And in my view, it is the commercial imperative that has been placed on the media industry. Editors ceased to be storytellers, and they started worrying about sustainability and worrying about revenues. As soon as we reached that point, that was the death of good journalism. Because editors were now looking at the balance sheet and also addressing issues that are raised by financial directors as to how they are performing month to month. What is the income statement and what are the expenses and what is the variance? And as soon as editors become preoccupied with that discussion, it actually raises a serious doubt for editorial judgment. And that I'm saying because it also speaks to the whole issue about how the Guardian newspaper came into the weekly Mail family, because it was exactly at that point that the weekly Mail tradition was compromised. And to me, that is what I call the elephant in the room, which is commercial imperatives. And that speaks also to the point that Mark made, that you look at the investments the SABC is making into the English news services, as opposed to performing African language bulletins. It is the pressure, it is the commercial pressure from the advertising industry. Advertisers want to place, want to put investments in bulletins that are in English as opposed to African language stations. And that is why, because of that commercial pressure, you found the weekly Mail opening up to the Guardian. And you find the SABC putting more investments into the English news bulletins as opposed to those that are performing. So I think it's high time that we really point out the elephant in the room and say, how do we deal with that? Because it continues to erode the role of editors.
Thank you so much, Phil. Thank you, everybody. We could go on and on and on and on about this line between the commercial and good journalism, which is exactly what Professor Dagmar was doing with this report. Please read the report. You've all got it. It's all been emailed to you. Thank you very much for coming. And I think I've run a bit over time. It's time for the next session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For those of you who are still with us, I'd like to stand up and stretch your legs. Maybe reach for the sky. I'm conscious of the fact that you've been sitting for 90 minutes. So I might be going to have a stretch, and we're going to start the next panel in a minute. Don't go anywhere, just stretch. I don't want to lose you. We should.
Sorry, Andy, we have a patient for time.
Only a minute. We need to start with quite fast. I don't think we're going to go.
Oh, no, give an
Check the process.
Yes.
Okay, everybody, I'd like to start. We're standing between you and dinner, so louder. Where's the audio? Right. Yay. Everybody's nice and quiet. Okay, we're standing between you and dinner. So we want to get this show on the road. So earlier today, Francois and I were talking to each other about the most political issue on an academic campus is the one of space. More vicious fights can never be had than those about offices and who occupies what amount of space on the campus. I think the second most political issue is publication. Who's got it, who hasn't got it, and where it goes, and where the money goes. Okay, so this is the panel that does kind of two things, I think. One is informational, gives us some information about what the journals are out there, what the requirements are, how to go about this, where to find your place in this world that is quite complicated in terms of publishing. And then the second thing is, I think, raise some of the issues around what publication demands and how one makes the right kind of choices, because there are many, many choices to be made. So on the panel, I have Leona Achtenhagen, who is the editor of the Journal of Media Business Studies. Okay. Then I have Steve Wildman, who's a past editor of the Journal of Media Economics. You can see in your program where they come from. Okay. And instead of Professor Bozena Mijewska, okay, sorry, yeah, somebody help me here. Okay, we have Sylvia Chan Olmsted, who's going to stand in. Okay, and then we have Ravinda Rana. Is it Rana? Have I said that correctly? Who's editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Education, Economics and Development. So we have on the panel a number of journal editors, active journal editors, but we also have people who are published and in the world. So I think prepare your questions. And I'm going to first of all hand over to
Okay.
Leonard's going to start us off. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, I tried to keep this reasonably short and look forward to lots of questions and discussion also afterwards. So, as I was introduced, my name is Leona Achtenhagen, the director of the Media Management Transformation Center at Jönköping International Business School in Sweden, and also the editor of the Journal of Media Business Studies. And I can't really leave out the opportunity to market that journal a bit here. JOMS was founded in 2004 by Robert Picard, and it is actually hosted at MMTC in Sweden. It is now the flagship journal of EMA, the European Media Management Association, and published by Francis and Taylor. Here you see our current editorial team. Well, me, you obviously see. And then we have Ulrike Lohn, a professor at the University of Tallinn in Estonia. Maybe you stand up, Ulrike, so everybody sees you. And we also have Björn von Rimscha, professor at the University of Mainz in Germany. So, as you see, all three of us are here at the conference, so please come and talk to us in case you're wondering whether your manuscripts might fit into the journal and if you're wondering anything about the process and so forth. Now, what does it take to publish in JOMS? Firstly, we look for manuscripts that are based on a relevant research question. So we are not interested in stuff that merely describes a phenomenon without any link to what else has been done in the field and so forth. So asking a relevant, possibly novel research question and anchor that research question in what's already out there. What do we already know about this phenomenon? To then go on to actually do a high-quality study. We accept both qualitative and quantitative research. We also have some conceptual papers, but probably less of that. However, we do have an open call for review papers. So if you want to review what is known about a certain phenomenon, or how has a certain theory been applied to the study of media businesses so far, we are also very interested in that kind of articles. And you can find the call for that on our homepage and get in touch with us if you're wondering about how that kind of paper would work. What is really important for getting published in JOMS is that you do make a contribution to advancing the field of media business studies. So we are not interested in pure communication studies that don't have any link to business, but basically trying to bring the field forward. If we look at the development of JOMS over the past years, we see the following picture. The color that you see for 2016 means that JOMS now is in the second quartile of all journals for 3 fields: business and international management, communication, and strategy and management. Meaning that it is a very relevant journal, not only within management, but also within communication. These quartiles are calculated based basically on the prestige of the journal and where it is cited, because self-citation, for example, would not push up this factor, okay? If you go to the Shimago homepage, you find the ranking of JOMS and also the other journals, of course. So it's a very good way of actually checking the quality of the journal that you might be thinking about submitting to. If we look at how well read JOMS is, the journal first went online in 2010, before it was only available in print. So you see here the development of downloads since it has gone on online, and you see that we're looking at a very nice development here. Well, you already brought up this issue of sort of where to publish and what our home schools push us to do. I guess most of you have some kind of target journal list or some kind of ranking that's important for where you're supposed to publish. So JOMS has been indexed in Scopus and EBSCO for a number of years, also Taylor Francis' own library. But very importantly for us, it is now included in the ABS list, which is especially relevant for those of you at business schools within business management, because it is really sort of the main list there. And for those of you in communication, it is also now on the Emerging Sources Citation Index, which I guess might be a relevant index for many of your home schools. And in order to celebrate these recent achievements, we are going to host a reception tomorrow, and we really hope you'll all join us. Have some wine and finger food after the last session tomorrow in the brasserie. So we hope to see you all there. Now, I'm actually also going to say some words about the topic of today's panel. Especially to our African colleagues here, I would like to say one thing. When choosing a target outlet, what is really important is to avoid the predatory journals that are out there, because I've seen that. Recently I was evaluating for a professorship position in Northern Europe, and there was one African professor who had an amazing 100 journal articles published. When I looked at his citations, he was cited 2 or 3 times. And then I looked a bit closer into the journals he had published in, and it was all predatory journals. It was all journals that he had to pay for getting published, but these journals usually do not have a review process, and they publish anything they get submitted. Okay, so don't do that, because it's not going to help you in your academic career. If you don't really know how to improve your article in a way of getting it published in a more established journal, this is a great forum for teaming up with someone who might have more experience and try to learn from these people. So do use the network that this conference can provide you to actually find co-authors to help you get into good journals. And it's much better if you have just a couple of really good articles compared to 100 articles in journals that don't really count, that nobody's going to read and cite. So at the end of the day, you will have spent a lot of useless time. Also, I think it's a great idea not to go for the highest ranked journal immediately, but to try to maybe start with a book chapter, start with a lower ranked journal, and then once you've learned the craft, sort of try to improve the outlets. Because otherwise it might be a bit of a frustrating experience. And it is a lot, I mean, publishing at the end of the day, a lot of it is a craft. So do learn the craft and then start to master it. I think that's all. Okay, thank you.
Well, I'm glad I didn't have to bring my Mac and go through the machinations we did this morning to get my presentation going. I'm not sure what the difference is. Same software, same thumb drive, but anyway, different presentation. Maybe the machine likes this one better. And I was asked to talk about the future of journals. And so my title is, if not journals, what? And the question is, will we have journals in the future? The internet, as well as new technologies, are just changing the environment for all sorts of media, and that would apply to academic journals as well. And my short answer is the journals are always going to be there, but the roles they played, and they would play three roles. One is certifying the quality of research. The second is helping people get the research in front of a relevant audience. So it's distribution from the author's perspective, but also a search perspective from those trying to find research relevant to what they want to do. And while certification will remain an important function or role of journals, it's other online vehicles that are coming along that are diminishing the relative importance of journals for the search and the distribution part of that. And so this ecosystem is evolving, and that's what I want to talk about. Okay, so the basic argument, you've already heard part of it. And journals' role for the search and the distribution part of research I think will be diminished in a relative sense. Part of it is because we're seeing an excessive proliferation of journals. And the internet has facilitated the creation of new mechanisms for circulating and finding research of interest, especially in the early stages. And then the rapidly evolving communication technologies have made it easier, even independent of these other new mechanisms I'll talk about in a moment, for finding research you want. But for those components of the communication discipline that are dealing with rapidly evolving technologies, what we have seen, is that refereed conferences for the people in those subdisciplines have come to take the place of journals as a place where they first get their research published in a refereed forum. All right, so why are journals proliferating? Well, there's both a supply side and a demand side to this. Supply side is The internet's made it really inexpensive to publish and distribute journals. Right? So it's not surprising when the costs go down, there's more room in the industry, you end up with more people coming in. There's also a demand side because academics want to be able to get their research out. And so even if you have lousy research, you can always find a lower ranked journal. Eventually somebody will take it until finally you come to the predatory journals that were just mentioned, that they will take it if you pay them. Right? And because we have what economists talk about information asymmetry, not everybody is as well informed as what journal will look important. 100 articles looks good until you start looking into them. And for some people, it makes a difference occasionally in a tenure or promotion decision, or especially if you're going to non-academics and trying to validate your importance. Now, even though the number of journals is increasing, the refereeing resources are not. It's you and me and other academics. And if you're like me, you're getting requests from more and more journals constantly to referee. It's a service to the profession. On the other hand, it takes up more of your time you can't do research with. And I think a consequence then is you're getting a lot more shoddy refereeing. People that are doing a quick pass through and say it looks good without really going through the details of an argument or an analysis. And so you end up with the certification part of the journals, in many cases, is not as well done as it used to be. And that's really important for a strong editor and an editorial board to manage the flow to referees. It's one of the things we did at the Journal of Media Economics and other journals do this. You don't want to overuse your resource. One that doesn't disappear, but if you do, then you won't get back the same quality. And so partly in response to these problems, and I'm only saying partly, we're seeing online working paper series become an important venue for getting new research into circulation. Something's really, I'm an economist, very important for economics. New stuff you find in online working paper series long before it ever shows up in a journal. Probably because the journal process takes 2-3 years, going through the refereeing process and finally it's accepted, and then you wait for it to finally show up in print. Although a partial response to that problem is now a number of management journals and some econ journals are saying once something is accepted, it goes up online with the date of acceptance on it, right? And then later on, the official publication date comes out, but you've got it already. And it makes it citable for the author, which is important. The referee conference proceedings are a response to the lag you get in journal refereeing and publication. And then online searches and citation services are now playing an important role helping people find what they want and to get what they want, out what they want before an audience is actually interested in it. Just as examples of online working paper series, the one I use most is SSRN, Social Science Research Network. I was surprised when I went to Michigan State to discover that non-economists don't use this nearly as much. And there are 3 sub-networks within it. There's the Economics Research Network, which carries a lot of stuff that's policy, as well as sort of behavioral econ and things that are more psychology-oriented. There's a Management Research Network, and there's a Legal Research Network. And I've used all of these. There are probably hundreds of journals available through SSRN. And I subscribe to maybe, 15, 20 possibly. And what I do is just like I used to go to the library and go through the issues of journals that I wasn't subscribing to. And almost always when I pick up a journal of a relevant subject, I'll come across a paper that's relevant to my research. Same thing, I can scan what comes up on these online circulated working paper series and get in on it before it becomes, actually a lot of this stuff gets cited long before it becomes published, just because people know that it's good research by knowing the researchers and validating yourself. So an example, one of those is the Economics and Networks e-journal, edited by a friend of mine, Nick Economides at NYU. And here's a table of contents. I can quickly look through the table of contents. And it comes out, there's one a day, 5 days a week of these. Most days I don't find anything I'm interested in. It's become broader over time. But if I am, then I can go to an abstract that comes with each paper. And if I'm interested in it, then I can click on the title of the paper and I can download it, and I've got it immediately. Right? So most of the new work that I find through these kinds of venues. And it's organized by subject matters, but they're also, I suppose these e-networks or the e-journals that are put out by research organizations, leading business schools, and I'll look at National Bureau of Economic Research. They fund their own research. It's highly regarded, and so they put something out. Unfortunately, they charge for it, but once you get the title, you can go online, you can plug the title into Google, and the authors will almost always put it out as a working paper through their university. You get it for free. But nevertheless, because I know the venue, I know where the source, I know it's likely to be high quality research. So you're already getting some validation before it goes to a journal. Same thing with the abstract, so I can read into it. The rise of refereed conference proceedings. When I was at Michigan State, over time, what started out as a telecom department became an high school. Not everybody's familiar with high schools, but they're sort of agglomerations of people from multiple disciplines that are all focused on the impact of information technology on society and the economy. By the time I left my department, we were then the Department of Media and Information. We had 8 different types of PhDs in the faculty, all focused on issues related to information technology. The technology is evolving very rapidly. As it evolves, people research it. And if you're going to wait 2-3 years for something to come out, the technology's changed and the interest has gone down. So you have these referee conference proceedings in 2 stages of refereeing. First for an extended abstract, and then to get into the proceedings, you have a group of people that get together prior to the conference and they pass on it whether it's publication quality. So it's a really compressed refereeing process and a publication process for people in certain sub-disciplines. It's more important for them to show up in the right conference proceedings than to show up in a good journal. And then online services for tracking and finding scholars and research. And I use ResearchGate at academia.edu, both of which, if I want to follow somebody, I put in their name or I put in the topic, it'll come back. I also get, if I say I'm following somebody, I'll get email notifications or people looking for me, find my article, they've cited it, here's where it shows up, and I can dig into all this. I want to pay more money, I can get more information. I haven't done that. And then Google Scholar, just plug in the appropriate keywords, you can find a lot of stuff just through Google Scholar. So these search and distribution services that have traditionally been done by journals are now being done by other mechanisms as well. Journals won't go away. Their role, especially as for certifying the quality of research, I think will remain. But when it comes to these other functions, you're going to find that they start to dominate, maybe not dominate, but they're certainly important supplements. And to some extent, they develop their own reputational mechanisms as well. And that's it.
Somebody told me they couldn't see me this morning. It's awful to be short until you get in the airplane. The short people get better seats. You guys cannot fit into the, yeah. Anyway. Okay. So as you can see, I'm not Boshana. Boshana asked me to present the information about the International Journal on Media Management for her. So I would do that with some information that she would like to share with you as the editor for the journal. A couple minutes to talk about maybe some tips for more junior scholar here in the audience based on me submitting papers for 30 years and being the reviewer for many years. For some reason, because I'm always on time, all the journal editors just keep sending me stuff. So I review articles all the time. So I'll talk a little bit about what I typically look for. And then I'm also the editor of a special issue by the journal, and I can talk a little bit about that experience as well. So, okay, for the information that the editor of, I kind of want to give an overview first. First is about the state of the journal performance in terms of access. Then it's about the submission in terms of the statistics. And then I will talk a little bit about the reputation of this particular journal. And there are a couple of issues about scholarship that the journal has observed in the past few years in terms of dual submission. And there's some academic honesty issue that Boshiana asked me to address. So, in terms of the subscriptions and downloads for this particular journal, it's about 64% of the journal subscription was online only last year. And the number of institutions with access via subscription, sales, and other subject collection totaled over 2,400 in 2017. And full text downloads for the International Journal Media Management reached over 36,000 in 2017. And it's important to talk about this number because it's a 43% increase since 2015. And just for this year, we have about 2% growth comparing to the same period of 2017. In terms of the general submission statistics, and they actually asked me not to be too specific because sometimes people who submit the manuscript would say, well, you say 60 days, how come we're still, 70 days and I haven't heard from you? It's a range and it's very much really dependent on, again, the reviewers, their timetable. So, but for this particular journal, we get about 35 to 45 submissions annually. And the average day from submission to the first decision is about 50 to 60 days. And then from submission to final decision, that is, if it's not rejected right away, is about 100 to 120 days. In terms of the acceptance ratio, it's about 50-ish to the higher end, 60%. Don't quote us on this. This is just, I thought it's very informative, but it's not really an official stats to share. But I think it's important for you to get an idea of the range. In terms of the ranking, Leona talked about SJR, the numbers there. The SJR is a size-independent prestige indicator that ranks journals by their average prestige per article. So it's based on the idea that not all citations are created equal. So here you can see our three main journals in our field. You have the International Journal Media Management, that's the blue line on top. And then you have the Journal Media Economics, that's kind of the red one in the middle. And then you have the Journal Media Business Studies. You can see a kind of an upward growing journal. So this is kind of a relative position. Okay, relative, these are the three positions of the three journals in our field, main journals in our field. So you have 0.553 and then 0.468, and then you have 0.263 over the years from 2010 to 2016. Leona may have the 2017 data. I think this is the most recent one. Yeah, so this is the most recent data that we have. In terms of total sites comparison, you can see here again, kind of 46, 37, 17. So it's pretty consistent, comparative. the position's pretty consistent. In terms of the category ranking, I think it's also useful to look at where we stand in each group, and Leoma talked about that a little bit. In terms of communication, out of 294, JMMs ranked 74. That's a second quartile. It is important to look at it because we want to move up to the first 25%. That's very important for all the journals. But for communication, that's where JMM is, and then you can see for the other two. Strategy and management is the same. The second quartile, and we're ranked 119, and then you can see in the business and international management category. This is the size score. That's another ranking. Again, it's pretty consistent, and we have seen some changes in the other two journals over the last few years. Okay, I think that's the information that Ocean I want to share with you. But I'll talk a little bit about submission to journals as a reviewer, in my experience as a reviewer. First, I would love for the authors to spend more time on the method section. I think because sometimes you work on something for so long, you know what you know. You know you did this, you know you did that, but you know what? We don't know, okay? And you assume that we should, the details are implied. No, they're not, okay? A lot of times I knew the researchers did all these things, but it wasn't. I mean, they did not indicate that in the method section, so I can only assume that they didn't do it, but I'm pretty positive, right? And then if you have to cut something at the end because the word limit, cut it somewhere else. Do not cut the method. Okay, that's very important. In terms of